Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time we're taking to the skies with the P600 AEW&C aircraft.
AEW&C.
AEW&C. It's kind of like a flying eye in the sky, keeping watch for, well, just about anything. And we've got a whole bunch of Embraer's own materials here, brochures, even some in Spanish, all about this amazing system.
Oh, that's interesting. You know, this P600, it could really change how countries think about defense, especially those with maybe tighter budgets.
Okay, so right off the bat, you've got my attention. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, what exactly is this P600?
At its core, it's a surveillance and defense system. But here's the thing. They built it onto Embraer's Praetor 600 business jet.
A business jet. Now, that's not what I was expecting.
Yeah, it might seem like an odd pairing at first glance, but it actually makes a lot of sense. You see, the Praetor 600 platform gives the P600 some serious advantages in terms of range, how high it can fly, and even, believe it or not, a pretty comfortable interior.
Comfort. So are we talking like luxury airliner meets military-grade surveillance?
Haha, not quite a luxury airliner, but yeah, the comfort factor is important when you're talking about crews being up in the air for long missions. But let's not forget the heart of this system, the radar.
The radar. Okay,
Yeah.
Tell me more.
It's what's called a dorsal mounted system, which means it's right there on top of the plane, and it uses this incredible GaN ESA technology.
GaN ES. I'm going to be honest, that sounds a bit like something out of Star Wars. What's so special about it?
Well, think of it this way. It gives the P600 this incredibly powerful vision, but instead of using light, it uses radio waves to see.
Okay, I'm with you.
And this GaN ESA tech, it lets the aircraft scan a huge area way further than older radar systems and in much more detail.
So it's not just seeing more, it's seeing better.
Precisely. And it goes even beyond that. See, it has a system built in called IFF.
IFF.
It stands for Identification Friend or Foe. So basically, the P600 can tell whether an aircraft or a ship is friendly or potentially hostile.
Oh, wow. That seems pretty crucial in a tense situation, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to make any mistakes there.
Not at all. And you bring up a good point about ships because the P600 isn't just focused on what's happening in the air.
So it keeps an eye on things at sea, too.
Absolutely. It uses something called AIS, the Automatic Identification System. It's kind of like a GPS for ships, you know.
Ah, okay.
It lets the P600 track ships, see their courses, get a full picture of the maritime domain.
So we're talking air and maritime surveillance all in one.
All in one. And that's just scratching the surface. The P600, it's built for a whole range of missions: early warning, border patrol, law enforcement, even electronic intelligence gathering. It's really a versatile system.
Hold on. Electronic intelligence. Now you're making it sound like a spy plane.
Well, it does have that capability. The P600's got what we call an ESM.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another acronym.
Right. It's the electronic support measure system. It can pick up on all sorts of electronic signals, radar, radio transmissions, things like that.
So it's like listening in on all the chatter out there.
Yeah, you could say that. It helps the P600 understand what's going on in its surroundings, especially if there are any potential threats trying to hide their electronic signals.
Okay, this is pretty impressive stuff. But with all this high-tech gear, I can only imagine this thing costs a fortune. Like only the biggest, most well-funded militaries could afford it.
That's actually where it gets really interesting. The P600 is designed to be much more cost-effective compared to your typical AEW&C systems.
More affordable. So this cutting-edge tech is accessible to more than just the big players.
Exactly. This could be a game changer for smaller nations who maybe couldn't afford those huge, expensive surveillance planes in the past.
I think we might need to unpack that a bit more because you're right, this changes things. But before we go any further, I'm realizing we're throwing around a lot of acronyms here. ESM, AIS, GaN ESA.
You're right. We probably should make sure everyone's on the same page with all this tech jargon. Let's break some of those down as we go.
I like that. So next, let's get into the real-world stuff. How does all this technology actually play out in real-life situations? Can you give us some examples of where the P600 could really make a difference?
Absolutely. Let's dive into that. Hashtag TTS, the deep dive, episode 2025-02-07, part 2 of 3. Okay, so picture this, a country struggling with drug trafficking along their coastline.
Okay.
Those smugglers, they often rely on small planes flying low, trying to stay under the radar literally.
Makes sense.
But with the P600's radar, its range, and especially that wide field of view we talked about,
Right.
well, makes it a lot harder for them to slip through unnoticed.
So it's like having this eye in the sky watching over everything, making sure nothing gets past.
Exactly. And it's not just about spotting them, it's about what happens next.
Oh, okay, so what does happen next?
Well, that's where the whole network-centric approach comes in.
The word centric.
Yeah, so the P600, it doesn't just operate on its own. It can share all that real-time tracking data with, law enforcement agencies on the ground or even at sea.
You mean like Coast Guard, police units, that sort of thing?
Exactly. Coast Guard, police, even other aircraft. It's all connected.
Oh, so it's like the P600 is coordinating this whole team of responders working together to stop those smugglers.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And because the P600 has such a sophisticated communication suite, all that information sharing is seamless super fast.
So we're talking about intercepting those drug shipments before they even have a chance.
That's the idea. It really can make all the difference.
This is amazing. It's not just about national security anymore. It's about global security too, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, but let's switch gears for a second and talk about something that affects a lot of us, the ocean. How can a plane like the P600 help with maritime security?
Good question. Well, imagine you have a country with these vast coastlines to protect maybe important fishing areas or, those offshore oil platforms.
Right.
Patrolling those areas with just ships, well, it can be expensive and it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
But the P600, it can cover so much more ground, or I guess I should say water.
So it's like having a guardian watching over everything.
Yeah, you could say that. But here's the thing. How do you tell the difference between a harmless fishing boat and something more suspicious?
Yeah, that's a good point. How do you do that?
Well, remember that AIS system we talked about? That's really important here.
AIS, the Automatic Identification System.
That's the one. Most ships out there, from little fishing boats to those huge cargo ships, they transmit their location and other information using AIS. The P600 can pick up on all that.
So it creates a picture of who's out there and what they're doing.
Exactly. Now, if a vessel isn't transmitting AIS, that's when things get a little suspicious.
Like a red flag going up.
Pretty much. It could be a sign of illegal fishing, smuggling, even piracy. And don't forget that electronic intelligence capability.
Right, the ESM.
Yes. The P600 can also listen for suspicious radio chatter or radar signals that don't match up with any known ships.
So it's like gathering all these pieces of information to figure out if there's a threat.
It's like solving a puzzle.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, so let's say the P600 identifies a potential threat. What happens then? Does it do anything directly, or is it just observing?
Well, the P600 isn't armed, but think of it as a force multiplier. You see, it can alert Coast Guard vessels, guide Navy ships, even direct other aircraft to intercept that suspect.
So it's a team player then?
Very much so. It's about getting the right information to the right people at the right time.
I'm starting to see how powerful this could be. But is there anything we haven't talked about? Any downsides or risks that come with this technology?
Of course, with any powerful technology, there are always potential downsides. Some people worry that having more of this kind of surveillance tech out there could actually increase tensions between countries.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like if everyone is watching everyone else, it could create a lot of suspicion and mistrust.
Exactly.
Especially between countries that maybe already have some conflict going on.
Yeah, that's something we need to think about.
It's like that saying, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right, so it's crucial to consider the ethics involved and how to use this technology responsibly. We want to make sure it promotes transparency and cooperation, not suspicion and secrecy.
You're right. Technology is just a tool. It's up to us to use it for good.
Exactly.
Okay, but let's go back to something you mentioned earlier about the P600 being built on a business jet platform. What are the benefits of that?
Well, using a platform like the Embraer 600 means that the P600 can take off and land from much shorter runways compared to, those big military aircraft.
Oh, that makes sense.
And it can operate at higher altitudes for longer periods, which gives it a real advantage in terms of coverage and endurance.
Right. Makes sense. And what about that comfortable interior we talked about earlier?
Haha, yeah, that can be a big plus for the crew, especially during those long missions.
Because they go win-win.
Yeah.
You get the agility of a business jet with all the tech of a military surveillance plane.
Exactly.
Speaking of tech, you mentioned something about self-protection. Does that mean the P600 can actually defend itself if it's attacked?
Yeah. It's not just about observing, it's also got a built-in self-defense system.
So what does that include?
Well, it has things like a missile approach warning system. We call it MAWS for short.
MAWS, okay.
And a radar warning receiver, or RWR, which lets the crew know if they've been targeted by enemy radar.
Wow, so it's like having a bodyguard for the aircraft.
Yeah, a high-tech bodyguard.
But if it's not armed, how does it actually defend itself?
Well, it has some tricks up its sleeve. One is something called the Countermeasure Dispenser System, or CMDS.
CMDS, okay.
It can release things called chaff and flares, which are designed to confuse enemy missiles and radar, giving the P600 a chance to get away.
So it's more about avoiding a fight than actually fighting back.
Exactly. It's all about staying safe while still doing its job.
Okay, so we've talked about how the P600 could change the game for things like drug interdiction, maritime security, and even air defense. But what about the bigger picture? How could this technology affect how countries interact with each other?
That's a really interesting question. It could go either way, really. It could either bring countries closer together or push them further apart.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So let's say two countries, maybe ones that haven't always gotten along, both get their hands on this P600 tech. What happens next?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Hashtag TTS, the deep dive episode 2025 ZO207, part 3 of 3. Well, they could end up in a kind of surveillance standoff, each one watching the other's every move, which could definitely increase tensions. Or they could choose a different path.
A different path like what?
Collaboration. Imagine them using those P600s to create a shared surveillance network.
Wait, you mean they'd actually work together?
Exactly. Think about it. They both want the same things: secure borders, counterterrorism, maybe even protecting the environment. Why not pool their resources and information?
That makes sense, I guess. They could cover more ground, respond to threats faster, and maybe even start to build some trust along the way.
Exactly. It could be a win-win.
But wouldn't that require a ton of trust? I mean, especially between countries that have a history of conflict.
Yeah, you're not wrong. It's not a simple solution. But having that shared platform, that common technology, it could be a starting point.
A way to open up communication and show they're willing to work together.
Exactly.
Okay, so the P600, this aircraft designed for, surveillance and defense, could actually help countries get along better. That's pretty wild.
It is. But of course, it's not all sunshine and roses. We have to remember that this technology could also be used in ways that escalate tensions.
Right. Earlier you mentioned that.
Imagine a country gets a P600 and they start, well, showing off a bit. Maybe they increase patrols along a border that's been disputed, or use that electronic intelligence gathering to listen in on their neighbors.
Ah, I see. Even if they're not actually doing anything aggressive, it could still look pretty threatening.
Exactly, especially to a country that doesn't have that same level of technology.
It'd be like showing up to a friendly gathering with a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
Not exactly sending the right message.
Exactly. That's why using this tech responsibly is so important. It's not just about the capability, it's about using it in a way that promotes stability and security, not fear and mistrust.
So, like with any powerful tool, it all comes down to the people using it.
Right. And that's why we need clear guidelines, maybe even some kind of international agreement on how to use AEW&C systems like the P600 ethically.
So we can make sure it's used for good.
Exactly, to make the world a safer place.
Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive on the P600 AEW&C aircraft. We covered a lot today, from the tech specs to how it could change national security, international relations, even the ethical questions it raises. It's been a fascinating look at a really powerful piece of technology.
It has. And the P600, it goes beyond just being a new aircraft. It raises some really big questions about the future of defense and the role of technology in our world.
Really big questions. So to our listeners out there, we'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you see technologies like the P600 shaping the future? Will it be for better or worse? Let us know. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.